Tonight, school kids from throughout our region and across the globe walking out of class, pushing their leaders to finally do something about climate change. Will they succeed where so many adults have failed? Then Paul Manafort has been sentenced in 2 cases, both for financial crimes. But is Robert Mueller still working on a collusion case connecting the Trump world to Russia? And later, the Young Turks join us to talk about Veto O'Rourke joining the presidential race, and also President Trump's latest inflammatory comments that are sure to fire up his base once again. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman, in tonight for Richard French. Before we get to the climate marches, 2 stories off the top tonight. We begin with President Trump signing his first veto. It was for the emergency declaration to build his border wall. Just yesterday, the Senate passed its rejection, with 12 Republicans crossing party lines to join Democrats. The president spoke from the Oval after the signing this afternoon.
It is a tremendous national emergency, and it's an invasion of drugs and criminals and people. We have no idea who they are, but we capture them because border security is so good. But they're put in a very bad position, and we're bursting at the seams. Our immigration system is stretched beyond the breaking point.
To override the president's veto, 2/3 of each House of Congress would have to vote to do so. That is extremely unlikely to happen. We also want to share with you the latest from that horrific terror attack at 2 mosques in New Zealand. 49 people killed, dozens more injured. Terror striking New Zealand.
I'm 66 and never thought in my life I'd live to see something like this.
The normally peaceful country that has never experienced a terror attack, now reeling following a mass shooting at 2 mosques.
People were running out. I saw some people had blood on their body, and some people were limping.
The horror beginning at 1:42 local time. Witnesses telling police a man dressed in all black stormed into the Masjid al-Noor mosque, firing an automatic weapon. This man surviving the attack by hiding under a bench.
He just came in, he was shooting, and I'm thinking that, if I get out, I'll get shot, so I'm just keeping my fingers crossed.
The second attack, according to authorities, 3 miles across town at the Linwood Mosque, again targeting worshippers praying inside. Police responding to calls for help, closing in, then taking a suspect into custody.
It is clear that this can now only be described as a terrorist attack. From what we know, it does appear to have been well planned.
The Prime Minister condemning the attack, calling this, quote, one of New Zealand's darkest days. This as police reveal they found lengthy anti-immigrant statements online written by an Australian man who's allegedly claimed responsibility for the shootings. Now to our other major story tonight. Massive protests across the country and around the world as school kids leave class to push for action on climate change. From Berlin to Rome to outside the United Nations in New York, thousands of students skipping school in more than 100 countries in nearly every state in the U.S. protesting inaction on climate change. 13-year-old Alexandria Villasenor has missed school every Friday since mid-December to strike, pointing to the deadly wildfires in her home state of California as evidence of a crisis.
I hope that we influence world leaders and politicians to put in laws and policies in place that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030.
Villasenor and thousands of other like-minded young activists inspired by Swedish teen Greta Thunberg. The 16-year-old credited for launching this youth movement last September, telling the crowd we are standing before an existential crisis. Climate change also becoming a hot-button issue ahead of 2020, with Democratic candidates pledging change.
We can unleash the ingenuity and creativity of millions of Americans who want to ensure that we squarely confront the challenge of climate change before it's too late.
President Trump has made it clear he thinks climate change is a fake science, often expressing doubts in the science. At one point tweeting, "We need global warming to deal with the record cold temperatures this year." My next guest attended 2 rallies today. Environmental talk show host and producer Betsy Rosenberg. Betsy, talk to me about the significance and importance of having kids at the center of today's protests, both in terms of the messaging itself and also the effectiveness of that messaging.
Well, kids and students are the ones who are going to be inheriting this earth, this world. this country, just as the students, in Parkland had such a strong moral authority to come out and fight, demand gun control after what they had witnessed. These students have woken up and smelled the carbon as far as what's going on the climate change front, and they've realized that our government is certainly not leading the way. This administration is leading us quickly off a climate cliff, and the mainstream media has not connected the dots sufficiently, has not covered the story as if it is as big a story as it is, and I can't think of anyone larger given the existential threat that is now just coming into focus. And these kids are saying, you're not acting like adults, so we're going to have to. And Greta Thunberg, of course, sparked this incredible day of international school walkouts, and she is most compelling in her quiet but very strong voice, and it's being heard around the world, and these kids are not going away.
I know you attended 2 protests today. Were you seeing and hearing a clear message calling for specific action, or is it more, let's do something, or does it not really matter?
They're asking for the government to show leadership. They're asking for grown-ups to act like grown-ups, to be responsible. By the time these kids come of age, it's going to be too late. The climate window is closing. It's late in the game already, and yet it's not too late. So we have this moment, sort of a sweet spot, although there's nothing sweet about climate change, where people are finally, because of the extreme weather events, because of the succession of government reports that are alarming as all heck, people are now like, we kind of went from what problem to yikes, we're freaked out, this is scary. But the worst thing that could happen is going from sort of denial to paralysis. So this is the moment to really wake up and smell the carbon, and for us to engage in a national conversation so these kids have a chance at a future. And by the way, these kids are my daughter, your kids, future unborn grandchildren. And of course, it's happening a lot faster than even the climate experts had predicted, because it's here, it's now, it's not just up in the Arctic, and it's not, decades off. It's already killing Americans.
Well, towards that end, Betsy, is there a consensus in your mind on a tipping point, at which point it'll be too late to get anything done about this? A lot of people are saying that tipping point might be 10 years away or less. Do we know?
Well, we don't know because we're in uncharted territory, but the best scientific minds who we should be listening to, they are experts in their field, not Sean Hannity, who thinks it's a hoax, or our president, who is quoting people who are climate deniers as recently as this week. We should listen to what the best minds say. And they're saying now we have 10 to 12 years that's very specific, very clear goal, to cut our emissions in half. That is huge. That is the biggest challenge of our time. It certainly will be America's greatest challenge. It is an existential threat to the future of civilization, and not the far future. I mean, we're not going to all drop off the planet one day, nor do we have another planet to jump off to. So we better get this right. 10 years, anyone who's a parent knows how quickly that goes by. And we're not even talking about it as a country. And my primary focus has been on getting mainstream news media to have dedicated programming on solutions. The good news is there is technology, there is policy change, but if we don't have the will to lead, and kids can only lead so much, but they can certainly keep shouting, we're on you, we're watching you, we demand action, they don't stand a chance. And that's just unconscionable. This is a morality issue here.
I want to get your response to people who would resist taking action, who say no point in the U.S. doing anything big until China and India and other countries do, or that the cost would be too expensive. How would you respond to people who make those arguments?
Well, those arguments, have been made for a decade, because that's how long, at least, I've been, covering this. And first of all, China and India are whipping our butts. China is the biggest manufacturer of solar panels right now. Why would we want to be left behind in the clean tech revolution? So that's no longer true, and anybody who says it is should get their denial facts updated anyway. And first of all, we are the country with the biggest footprint. Per capita, Americans have the biggest impact. Overall, China, because they're a more populous nation, have the biggest total emission output. But per capita, per person, we are up there. If we don't show the way, what kind of leadership is that? What kind of responsibility is that? What is that saying to our kids?
Finally, Betsy, is there a way to quantify the damage that's being done by the president's positions and some of the actions that he's taken?
Well, I'm not good at memorizing facts, but every morning in my inbox there are stories with incredible statistics that show just how many Americans are going to die of air pollution, climate-related weather impacts, insect-borne. And by the way, insects are disappearing. Bees are disappearing. Guess what? You may not like, mosquitoes and flies, but they're part of our ecosystem. And when the bees go and the insects go, guess what? We're next. We have an extinction crisis going on. There's numbers that are all scary, but everything is consistently showing signs of ecosystem collapse. And climate change is not the only cause, but it's the great exacerbator. It's the mother of all environmental threats. It makes the oceans warmer. We haven't even talked about oceans. They're warming. They're filled with plastic. The shells of, clams, lobster, all our favorite seafood are melting because the ocean is so warm. Where we humans have really, not knowingly, but we've known for at least a few years, are having a huge impact on our entire planet. And it's the web of Earth, web of life. You tug on one end of a spider web and the whole thing unravels. And we are starting to see the great unraveling. And we have not been acting like we're paying attention. And that needs to change. And I do think this is a tipping point between the weather, disasters of 2018, the government reports, and now students getting involved. And again, they're not going away. I think we have reached critical mass. And now it's time to get some programming on to hear what we can do, because if people think there's no hope, they're just going to go back to sleep and say, I don't want to know, I'm too small, I'm only one person, what can I do? There's everything we can do. Humans cause this problem, this planetary pickle, only we can solve it, but the time is late, and hopefully that means right now things are going to change.
Betsy Rosenberg is an environmental talk show host and a producer. Betsy, thanks for a few minutes, appreciate it.
Thank you, really appreciate the time.
And up next, a former federal prosecutor joins us to take a look at the Russia probe. Paul Manafort is behind bars, but that doesn't necessarily mean Robert Mueller is done with him. We'll explain after a break.